Kill the Cat Radio. Hey, we are back. Kill the Cat Radio. 2 mics. Season 2, episode 3. Got a real special guest in the house tonight. He's a fellow poet, interesting gentleman named Sean Patrick Mulroy. Just finished this interesting chapbook called Hated for the Gods. There's links below so you can get one for yourself. He opens up with, I love a good Brooklyn flophouse. I've never met the guy. He came over my house here, the studios, in the Villa Borghese studios. I didn't even know the guy before. He was recommended by a friend of mine in Boston. Sean was about to go to Eastern Europe and Italy to promote his new book, but my friend in Boston was very accurate about why I should interview this gentleman. Sean is a bit ADD. So am I. I'm a bit ADD. We're both 90s kids. We got along like matches and gasoline. Now, meeting new people is always strange, but my cat broke the ice, so we started talking about cats. Then we started talking about queer theory. Then we started talking about poetry. And then we pretty much talked about a whole bunch of other stuff that may or may not be released on this particular episode. Gotta say, fantastic guy, really talented. His work really impressed me. Usually poetry doesn't do it for me, but he's got the skills. Let's go ahead and welcome Mr. Sean Patrick Mulroy. Flophouse, by the way.
Oh.
There were like 7 guys who lived here before I moved in here.
Love a Brooklyn flophouse.
Under here. Like, so you think artists and cats are similar?
I mean, I think cats fulfill a purpose for a lot of different kinds of people. Like, I think, but I think that purpose, so like, okay, the whole spiel on cats and dogs, yeah. Right? Dogs co-evolved with us. The reason we beat the Neanderthals is because of dogs. And so, like,
they're more like obedient.
They're like thralls. They're not really pets. Like, we evolved to love dogs, and dogs evolved to love us. So if you treat a dog like shit, it will stay. A cat.
That's so weird. That's so bizarre.
A cat is a very recent, relatively speaking, like part of human civilization, right? They only came around during agrarian times. They came around specifically to eat our mice. We started feeding them. They slowly domesticated. But like cats, you're still entering into an agreement with like an independent entity.
Oh, that's it.
So the reason why I like cats is because you actually have to like kind of work at them a little bit.
Oh, yeah,
and each one's a little different, and they're so deliciously weird. But one of the things they do is they definitely love to like sit in the middle of whatever it is you're doing, right? So like if I'm writing a poem and I have a cat, he'll come and sit on my keyboard, and I'm like, bitch, you know I'm busy. First of all, if you want a cat to love you, just say openly that you don't like cats, and they'll come sit on you. And I do think there's a thing where they like get that thing into your system. You know, they have that weird like mind control fungus. You know about this?
Yeah.
So like pregnant women can't be around it, but like also cats give off this like, I don't know if it's a fungus or it's some contagion that they give off. When you get that thing, that pathogen into you, it makes you like cats more.
That's
so
weird.
Like when people are crazy cat ladies, it's partially because they've reached like saturation. I think it's the thing that causes toxoplasmosis also makes you like cats, but it might be another thing in them.
That's
Regardless.
So
yeah, if you really like cats, odds are good that you've been infected with like the cat-loving molecule. It's me too. I love them.
So what's great about you, though, and why I brought you all the way here to Williamsburg, Brooklyn, with the Villa Borghese, the reason why is because I saw your performances.
So, I was a singer and a songwriter before I became a poet, and a big part of becoming a poet was because I don't play that well with others. You know, I like to make music a lot and I enjoy singing, but touring with a band was just like, it's just logistically impossible. And then on top of it, add to that the fact that at least at the time, poetry had these preset audiences. There were venues.
Oh, I see.
So like by being good at poetry in Boston, I got people visiting poets from Nebraska, from like, I went to school in Boston. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's how you met Tess Walker.
Correct. We were in the same creative writing class actually. So like, my band broke up and I started doing performance poetry on the like recommendation of a friend, creative outlet, and then like I kind of had some people in the scene that I was interested in impressing. Like, I just thought they were really cool artists, so I wanted to get better at writing, and they came to poetry because I didn't have a band and I needed stage time, and a friend of mine from high school who went to Wellesley was like, come to this thing with me.
Oh, that's cool.
And we had been like in poetry slams at this writing summer camp that we went to.
You go up on stage and do these things?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
so like, you know, look, I mean, it was a pleasure because I hadn't had any stage time. Well, and I'll tell you, it's different. It's a different phenomenon. Like, it seems like a distant memory now, but like, you know, when I first got into poetry, I had come to it from music, like I said, and from being a singer. And when you fuck up as a singer, you have a whole band to cover for you. And if you fuck up as a poet, it is just you. And so when you first get started, it's like incredibly naked. But then when you get good at it, it's just like, it's the best. It's like there's no other performance art by it.
How do you?
Yeah, but then the whole thing, if you're good enough, you're in control.
Wow.
And like the thing is that like I can tell you, there's like a skill set you inherit, and I think part of it is because I was a musician, and part of it's because I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, which like kill me, but anyway. But you know, that's like a whole ass mistake worth of a career. And there's a poem in my book called Barsky Shalosy, which is Russian for gentleman's mischief. It's a whole terminology I can explain later. But anyway, it's about a half an hour in performance.
Wow.
And I did the whole thing straight through without stopping. The guy who was like the event organizer afterwards was like, wow, like, you know, you were up there for a really long time and you didn't stop. And I don't think anyone ever like talked. Like, I think you had the whole room the whole time. And I'm like, well, the reason for that is because if you're paying attention, if you're clued into your audience, then if you feel the room start to sag a little bit, you just alter your vocal pitch, and it pulls everyone back in, right? So, you know, because a lot of poets, I think, make the mistake of thinking that if you're like reading in performance, that you're like cheapening the work somehow, but like, you know, those people are why no one reads poetry, right?
So because you think, because the poet who's on stage, the reason why, well, we'll get into that too, but like you're saying that the reason why people don't like poetry is, and especially poetry slams, when they hear that, especially coming from the 90s, it's kind of like it just has a bad smell to it.
Well, poetry slam has like a couple of things going against it. One, it's been like a cultural joke / meme for a really, really long time, right?
No, that's facts.
And like some of that is warranted, right? There is a kind of political outrage that goes along with it. There is a cadence, right? And like, I'm not immune to that cadence. I use it sometimes. If you want to function within the medium, you need to find ways to like both associate with and like differentiate yourself from the styles of the genre, right? But also poetry in general is something that goes against a lot of like American sensibilities, right?
That's interesting.
Because, well, okay, so like music, for example, if I sing a song to you and my voice is like really pretty,
right, then
like I am demonstrating to you like proof that I have a thing that I can do that maybe you, the audience member, cannot do. And so like there's like a respect that comes to music or dance, and poetry. What you're doing is you're showing that you can think better than your audience, or that you can express better than your audience, and we in America resent that deeply.
Why do you think we resent it in America then?
I mean, partially that's a cultivated thing. That's like a anti-intellectual culture that's been cultivated since the Red Scare, right? Americans. But like, you know, and I can get into how the CIA like ruined literature in America, but that's a whole other thing, and that's like proven. I'm not trying to be like too tinfoil hat on you. No. But like, no. But there's like books written about it. It's really exciting. But in addition to that, I think that you're also looking at a group of people who are descended from pioneers and religious zealots. So this is a group of people who are very hands-on. They're the kind of people who believe that they personally are capable of carving a better life for themselves out of nothing. And so there's a kind of what's the word? Like I don't want to say egalitarian, but like
utilitarian. Like they're not having like creative people because they're like, what's the point? But Oscar Wilde said all art is useless, so
Well, yeah, but Oscar Wilde said a lot of crazy things.
He would be great on Twitter, though,
he would have been such a huge hit on Twitter for sure. But no, generally speaking, I think it's mostly just that anti-intellectual streak that's been cultivated in this country for the last 70 years. And it'll pass, but, like, meanwall, Europe, like, loves poetry.
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, it may not pass in our lifetime, but, like, lives are short, countries are long.
When did you write this book?
So it came out last year. I wrote it in 2020 through 2022, on and off, mostly 21 to 22.
It's a great book.
Thank you. Like, I appreciate it. Yeah,
and the link below, because like this guy's like no joke. Like I don't like poetry either, and as a writer of poetry, it's not a easy business. But to have somebody like a poet like you here is very exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, and there are poems in here that are old enough to like ask where they came from, right? But most of this book is, I would say about 70% is new material. So there's an expression in queer culture that's like painted for the gods, right? Or anything for the gods, right? And it comes from, if I understand correctly, it used to be painted for the gods. And it's because you paint for the back row, right? And so if you're like painted for the back row, that means you're like covered in makeup. If you're painted for the gods, it's like even more, right?
That is so crazy. Right. I didn't even know this. I have so many gaps in my education.
Yeah. Well, this is like one of those little niche like Argo things, right? So then hated for the gods is sort of like, one, it's like how hated, like very, and two, it's like a line from that poem I just mentioned, the Barsky Sholosy poem, with we're hated for the gods we are and hated for the gods we knew before, right? And it's just sort of this idea of sort of the extremity of dislike that I think is sort of leveled at gay men specifically, and like the things that belong to us. And then also sort of on top of that, it's like a little bit of a, I don't want to say inside joke, but like, right. I definitely am one of those people well, I mean, like I'm one of those people who like attracts derision sometimes. So I think,
you said, you're a
iconoclast.
Iconoclast. Yeah. It's like you said about cats, like kind of disrupting.
Yeah.
There's a certain part of you that you have, and this book. Now, is this your first?
This is my first full length. I did a book years ago under a different name that was shorter, that technically counts as a full length, but it was like self-published and like not very many copies. I think it was only like 600, 700 copies that I sold.
That's a lot. That's like huge. That's a big deal.
Not for a professional.
Wow, look at this dude over here, man. He's just like, screw everybody. I love it.
No, I mean, like, I think one of the things that poets do that's really frustrating is we sell ourselves really short. One of the things I'm most proud of about this book is I really worked hard to make a book that, for an expert at poetry, they could look at this and they could see, like, okay, almost everything in this book is an iambic pentameter, or not pentameter, I'm sorry, iambic meter. And, there's like all of these like specific like craft things that I've done, lots of internal assonance, like these kinds of rhymes and things like that. But at the same time,
I noticed it, actually. I mean, that is where I kind of have some kind of information. That's why I was so impressed by your work, because, and actually, I kind of want you to read like a short one, if you wouldn't mind. Are you okay with that? Like,
absolutely.
And we'd be right back. 2, 1.
Fetish. Leather braided into leather, bound into a cord, and dyed night dark. I don't remember where I bought the bullwhip, only how it hung, suspended from a hook screwed through the ceiling of my first apartment, clearly visible as you walked in the front door. It stayed there like a talisman against those who might judge my lifestyle, as it was sometimes called in those days, though I was a virgin and the S&M just decoration. Except once, when twisted up on X and dextromethorphan, I got a friend to lick my shoulders with the whip's black tongue. It felt good, and I loved the sound it made against my naked back, like someone gave my skin a voice, and it was laughing.
Kill the Cat Radio.
Interesting things that you brought up that I found to be fascinating was that You said that there's definitely something that the gay culture owns that no one else can have or understand. Can you elaborate on this?
Oh yeah, I mean, part of it's just straight up like when you're a marginalized group of people, or like and I mean that literally, right? Like you're at the margins. There's a really famous gay poet named Mark Doty who talks about how like being, yeah. So Mark talks about, no, for sure. So Mark talks about like how queer perspective like places you at an angle to the world, so you automatically are better at certain kinds of art. I actually think that queer people are specifically good at poetry. If you look historically, some of the most important poets throughout history have been gay men, which, like, you know, self-serving observation, but nevertheless like one that's based in fact. Like if you look at like the Shakespeare's, plural, of like various cultures, they're all gay guys.
Well, that's what's fascinating too. I mean, look at the Beatniks.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, all of them were queer. You know, as we would find out later from Ginsberg, although I kind of like he did Kerouac kind of dirty in my opinion, but...
Whoa, wait. Now explain this, because like, I met Ginsberg, I hugged him.
I don't know, I like Ginsberg, don't get me wrong, and like, so we're clear.
How did he do him dirty, though?
Oh, look, Ginsberg talked a little bit too frankly about Kerouac's final days, and Kerouac's final days were not pretty. Like, he was like... drunk and like weepy and very depressed and like just a messy like grieving drunk who like would occasionally have sex with Ginsberg, and like in this way that Ginsberg did not portray as glamorous. And like, you know, early on in college, like Ginsberg and Kerouac were involved, and like it was much more exciting and like sexy and naughty and all that. It's
but
like,
you think he did him dirty, like in a sense of
just
like,
going
just
in too deeply
shit, like,
about
giving out his secrets.
Yeah, like I don't need to hear about Kerouac getting drunk and like begging to give Ginsberg a blowjob. Like that just sounds like...
Whoa, did that happen?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no. I mean, like Kerouac and Ginsberg were involved. The reason why Kerouac got kicked out of Columbia is because they caught him and Ginsberg in bed in their underwear. Like it's like very normal.
I thought because he hid a weapon and helped Ginsberg stash a body.
I
That
mean,
was just me. I mean...
Sure. Like the thing is that like Ginsberg was one of those queers who just hooked up with a lot of straight guys, which like fine, but you know.
But you're saying that. Like,
but I don't think Kerouac was straight either. I think Neil was. I don't think Kerouac was.
You think Neil Cassidy?
Yeah, I think Neil Cassidy was largely straight.
Yeah,
him and Ginsberg had like an ongoing affair for like a really brief period of time, like from like the 1940. I want to say 1945 to 1947. I don't have the numbers like fresh in my mind, but when they lived in Denver together, they were doing this weird thing where they were trying to become one mind, and so they were like spending hours like staring into each other's eyes, and like that necessarily became sexual because Ginsberg's a very sexual person. Please Master is about Neil, I'm pretty sure. And there's another one about like, I think being in a hammock somewhere. And
but
that's
what
also
I'm
with
fascinated
Neil.
about this conversation, to be honest with you, is definitely something that I think people who are listening to this would be curious about. Not to use a funny term.
That's funny.
But I mean, it's Kill the Cat Radio, so curiosity killed the cat, so why not?
Mm-hmm.
But to say it's a domain.
So I mean, like, here's the thing. I'm loath to say it, even though I think it's true, just because I feel like it's off-putting to people, and like my intention is not to like alienate people before they hear what I have to say about other things, right? But I will say that in the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time researching queer history and like researching poetic history, and there's so much overlap there that it's profound. It's striking. You know, when you look at like the two categories of people who are like largely responsible for most of the poetry we give a shit about are like Arabs and Persians, and then gay men.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I actually know this. I actually totally agree with you. I just wonder if people understand this. You know
I don't think they do. So, like, one of the things that I find very frustrating about sort of like queer life right now, right? And so we had this really rich and separatist culture in the 70s, and we were very powerful. We were very chic. Right? And then AIDS happened and wiped out most of our most interesting people because as the just endlessly amusing Fran Lebowitz, is that Fran Lebowitz is the thinker, right? The sort of salty lesbian who talks a lot.
Wait, who are we talking about here?
I always get Fran Lebowitz confused with Annie Leibovitz.
Oh, right. Well, they're both cool, though.
Yeah, I know they are, but differently. So Fran talks about how, like, AIDS killed off a lot of the coolest people and the best artists because they were the people having the most sex, which is true, right? And we're talking about a group of people...
sex and art is connected?
Well, sex and being gay in the 70s and being, like, with it, yeah, absolutely. And, like, when you look at... that group of people, this separatist sort of like very anti-capitalist, pro-civil rights, like there's a deeply rooted connection between like the civil rights movement and the gay rights movement, right? Shockingly, they sold us out as soon as they got theirs, which like story of our lives. But generally speaking, like the far left contingent of the sort of like gay movement was the predominant culture. AIDS happened, and we're talking about a group of people who were literally writing essays about how like sex is like the social equalizer, right? Like everyone deserves to have sex, everyone deserves to be touched and loved, and like this is a way that we can get past things like race and disability and social inequity and like financial inequity, right? And so of course all of these people died. So then we see sort of this surviving class of gays who are, maybe just this side of believing that God has like unleashed his wrath upon us for being sinful. And then, yeah, exactly. And then on top of it, you have a group of like bourgeois, very wealthy, very connected gay men who prior to this were not willing to like lower themselves to be part of the like broader public gay culture, who for like their own survival become invested in activism, specifically in AIDS activism, but then later in social activism. And so you see a group of people who are accustomed to being in control, who know the ins and outs of politics, who know a lot of people in places of power. They come into prominence. And the selling point, perhaps shrewd, but nevertheless, in my opinion, counterproductive, that they decided upon is assimilation, right? So we're just like you, we want to have houses and kids and marriages and blah, 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 right? But like, there are plenty of us, myself included, who believe that like we are not spiritually designed for that kind of life. And like, sure, everyone should have the right to do whatever they want, right? Straight people, gay people. So like if gay people want to live a straight life, like, or a quote unquote like traditional nuclear family based life, like that is their business and their right. And like, I laud them for that. Cool, right? But I do think that there are things that we are inherently good at and like that are part of our nature. And so as a result, some of that is about art. Some of that is about social forces, right? Pushing things forward. Like we tend to be disruptive in some ways. One of the reasons why governments tend to dislike queers, regardless of their political orientation, right? Because commies don't like queers, fascists don't like queers, is because we are less predictable behavior-wise than other groups of people. We don't tend to establish unbreakable bonds. We tend to eschew albatrosses, right? So like we don't have kids, we don't buy property, etc. And this is harder to predict and thus harder to control.
That's fascinating, dude. I fucking love that shit.
Yeah, I mean, and it's taken me, what I will say is it's taken me a long time to get there. I definitely was one of those assimilationist people, like when I was a kid. And then just like slowly but surely you sort of see the folly of it. And like bottom line, if there's like one idea that I would love to express to other gay people, it's this. It's like we have been set up to believe by virtue of this sort of intentional vacuum of counterexamples in popular culture, in public life. We are set up to believe that we are essentially like straight people with a flaw, right? And like,
Jesus,
right, you know what I'm saying? But like, think about it. Like, you look at like a gay man, right? And it's like, oh, it's like I'm just like you, except that like I have this like one thing where like I have a weird like quirk or flaw that makes me attracted to other men.
Like someone's like there's judginess, like.
Well, yeah, and it's like because we're not built to fully execute straight life, like by nature. it's somehow seen as a flaw. But like, I actually think that it's very important to recognize that like gay people are not failed straight people. They're successful something else. And we don't really talk about that something else. And I think that's intentional. There's a great deal of censure there, because allowing those possibilities to exist, to establish themselves, puts governments in a difficult situation, like trying to determine a third method of control.
How are they going to control you now?
Exactly.
Like, what are they going to do now?
They would have to like learn, they'd
right.
have to learn a whole new set of genders and like figure out what those genders want and then control those. So better to keep us sort of like serving in heaven and like, no, thank you, you know? And so like, there's a quality to that. There's, you know, and there's like fringe stuff too. Bottom line, I think we're a phenotype.
Wait, describe that. I don't understand.
Okay, so there's this really interesting guy online. He did a TED talk, and like it's flawed. There's some parts of it that are kind of essentialist in a backwards way, but like he's talking about his kid who's gay, his son, and he's like a cardiologist from the Midwest, right? So like on the one hand, he's from the Midwest, so he's a little bit like less than thrilled about his gay son, but on the other hand, he's a cardiologist. He's like a premier cardiologist, so like he's a smart man. He's trying to figure things out, and he kind of goes into discussing how his gay son like is sort of the glue that holds his family together, and then he transitions to this discussion about ants. And he shows this picture of these two ants, and one of them is like huge and bulky and like fierce looking, the other one's really small. And he's like, these two ants are actually twins. And this one was marked by the queen for being like a soldier ant, and this one was marked for being a worker ant. Okay. And I think when we look at what are the likely like quote unquote causes of homosexuality, of gender queerness, right? These are things that come from in utero. And the likelihood of being queer in a pregnancy where the mother experiences distress, right, is like much higher. So like in his,
that's crazy.
That's
wild to think.
It's a thing, yeah. And so like in his wife's case, she was diagnosed with cancer while she was pregnant with his son. And so there is a certain amount of, you know, there's evidence there. There's also evidence that like, it's a very popular study. It's quoted a lot that like the more older brothers you have, the more likely you are to be gay. That study, I've read it. It's aggregate data from another study that they used to make this analysis, but like there is a statistical significance based on this very limited sample.
This is fascinating stuff. I mean, at least to me, you know what I mean? But
yeah,
like,
no,
I mean, it's fascinating for our people who are listening too, because I think people need to know more about this information.
I mean, I think it's interesting, and it's not something we talk about, right? Because like one of the ways that we have decided to eschew queerness as an essentialist idea is to sort of like set to the side the question of like what we actually are, right? I used to, you know, talk about like how our culture is sort of hamstrung by the fact that we're raised by straight people. So I nowadays what I say is like, you know, we look at things like race, right? And we have a lot of discourse about race. We have to talk about like, you know, what being born non-white does to you. What being born non-white does to you, and like what those different like sort of subcultural movements can like bring to the table. But I believe race is largely a social construct that is masquerading as a biological construct, and queerness is a biological construct that is masquerading as a social construct, right? And so because there's things that are inherently different, like I'm not saying there aren't, and I actually think it's divorced from sexuality in a lot of ways, right? Like there are plenty of guys who have sex with men who are not like me, right? But there's like a specific category of gay men, like we have the same cadence to our voice, we tend to like the same music, we dress differently, we present differently, we write differently. And I think that that's actually like a very specific like social phenotype, and we've been marked by, you know, whatever hormonal thing happens in utero or in our early lives that make us more likely to be this kind of delicate but tough like alternative to masculinity, right?
But what I find fascinating too about what you're talking about is that it's not necessarily, I think what people get confused mainly is because they think, oh, it's just about sex. And I think you just broached on that topic.
Well, yeah, and that's the other one that I've kind of like come around on, right? Which is like, I always say like, okay, so tomorrow I'm in an accident, right? And I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I can't have sex again. I'm still gay, You know what I mean? And so, like, it isn't really about sex, right? There are sex workers who are men who prefer women who have perfectly adequate and or like satisfactory sex with other men. That doesn't make them gay. It's just they're having like homosexual sex. And like, we actually didn't start associating those two qualities, right? This sort of like gay life, gay gender with sex between people of the same like body type until the word homosexuality was invented in the late like 19th century. And that's when you start to see this sort of shift in the way that we perceive behavior, because it used to be, it was like, yeah, like, you're not gay, you're just at boarding school, right? And like now there's still an element of that in culture, but it's a little bit hampered by this idea that there are categories of people, you are a man, and then if you have sex with a man, you are in a whole new group of people, even if you're mostly straight. That's still like a big transition of your identity. And so like, and that's like relatively newfangled as a notion. Like, that's not, in my opinion, it's inaccurate. It's transitional.
Because a lot of people who would even criticize like the idea of queer theory, which I've studied,
yeah,
or anybody out there who would think that, they're like persistent on thinking, okay, well, if you're straight, it's who you fuck. Right? And it's like, no, it's like you said, presenting these ideas about what we're trying to do here. And that's what's fascinating to take these ideas, because a lot of people are unclear of that difference, and especially the idea of the intelligence of what queer theory should have been, in my opinion.
Well, yeah.
And I don't know what it is now, because it just seems sort of perverted, not the queer part of it, but that it's been twisted.
Well, it's identitarian, it wasn't intended to be. So Butler, in the original treatise talking about queer theory, right, and about queerness as a term, specifically stated that it should not be an identity category because it would be too broad. And like, while respectfully, I think that it's really no one's place to question anyone's gender or identification. There's absolutely like a spicy straight problem, okay? Which, like, problem in air quotes, but
idiots.
I mean, no, not always. Look, there are plenty of perfectly.
They're scared of outsider people. They're scared of anything that's like bucks the trend.
Well, sure, and there's a certain amount of. So, like, okay, I have been gay my whole life, and I've transitioned from a bunch of different philosophies about that. I've approached it from a bunch of different angles. I'm really interested in the one I'm in right now, partially because I'm in it right now, partially because it's very empowering, it's very motivating, but I've been gay that whole time. There are people who identify as queer, and it's a philosophy, and it's an approach, right? And their sexual behavior, their gender behavior, their attitudes about their own bodies, right? These things are not particularly queer. So if their philosophy changes, their queerness wanes. And it is very challenging when you're trying to create community, and there's this sort of influx of people with very different life goals and ideas about what is good for the community, who, like, prior to the last 10 years would have been outside of said community. It's a little frustrating, right? But I do think that there's room for everybody at the table. It's like low-key the point.
I agree with that.
But it's at the same time, like, I do think that there are distinctions that have to be made based on medical needs, based on lifestyle needs, amenities, things like that, right? But it's how we end up with these conversations about, like, queer spaces being too sexualized. You have people on Twitter being like, stop sexualizing queer culture.
Oh, dude, I
had to quit Twitter because of that element. Like, I literally was posting my cross streets when people were like, take pride private, and I was just like, literally, like, pull up or shut up, dude. Like, I can't. I
understand the frustration.
If you want to take our behavior and put it back in private for the children, like, you have picked the wrong subculture. Like,
yeah, but can you even understand at all? And again, not to be like dismissive, but you can see like people are like, maybe they're more nervous. Maybe actually, I think they're more nervous about themselves than more nervous about you.
I mean, look, there is a trend towards homophobia in Gen Z, right? Like they are more homophobic than the millennials are. That's trackable. And it's because they're very anti-sex. And part of the reason they're very anti-sex is...
how'd that happen?
Oh, well, I have a theory. So first of all, from the time they were like adolescents, they've seen hardcore pornography, right? Like,
wow. Okay.
Yeah, like,
let's do it. Let's get.
I mean, no, it's real. Like the internet has like I remember very vividly the first time I saw like what was essentially an advertisement for pornography, and I was like 14. Okay, these kids have been seeing porn since they were like 8. Their parents give them smartphones really early, and it just takes one afternoon of being curious to see like all kinds of shit that like when you're young is scary, and I think that's part of it. I think part of it is a sort of it's a reaction to that. I think it's a reaction to the sort of like capitalist commodification of sexuality and body image, right? But I also think that a part of it is cynically on my part, not on theirs. If you are queer identified but you're not gay, sex being an essential part of queer culture is like a fast recipe for you no longer being in group. Yeah, so the bottom line is this. Like, I do think the culture is shifting. I don't think that it is constructive to sit around and gatekeep queerness, even if there are reasons I could come up with to justify it, right? I do think, however...
Who's gatekeeping queerness?
I mean, nobody, and that's part of the problem. But, like, I mean, I'm kidding, but...
Wow, that's interesting.
No, here's the thing. Look, like I was saying, like, I think there's this newer crop of queer kids who... by virtue of claiming queerness are queer, right? Bottom line, okay? And I am not naive enough nor uneducated about history enough to think that there being more queer people is like why they're giving us trouble, right? Like you'll always see there's always an element of queerness. It's like, oh, if this group of queer people would just behave, then they wouldn't be doing what they're doing to us in Florida. Like bullshit. No, they would be doing that anyway. With that in mind, I don't think it's useful to be like, oh yeah, you're not the kind of queer that counts. Like that's stupid.
Yeah, what's that about?
Well, I mean,
it'd be the same thing if you're not black enough to be black. Like, what's that about?
Well, here's how I'll differentiate it, right? So like there are specific purposes for which queer solidarity like expands beyond just like feel good support, right? It is perhaps slightly counterproductive to have so many people who are identifying as queer who don't have gay sex, right?
So the sex is essential.
Sex
to a degree.
Well, no. Here's what I'll say. So, like, sex is part of the gay lifestyle, part of the reason why gay spaces are important, particularly for women and for men, but like for homosexuals, right? Specifically, I was going to say particularly for women and for men and for trans people. So really for everyone, but specifically for people who are interested in queer sex, because we are a minority by definition. The sort of broader gendered queerness that we're now dealing with, right? Where it's like, I no longer feel like the traditional maleness or traditional femaleness really defines me. And like realistically, who feels that way? Nobody, right? But if you're queer identified, that means that you've done the philosophical work and you've decided that this is the path that you're going to take to reject that kind of gender binary. And I actually think that's useful, and those people can be allies. But if I'm trying to get laid, right, I don't want to go to like a gay meeting or like a queer hangout and then like invariably find myself hitting on straight people. It's like, or like whatever, queer people who don't have sex with men. And so like it's like a double-edged sword. I will say that I've seen it handled really well in New York, which makes me really happy. There's a sex party that I really enjoy called Inferno. And they do this really cool thing where they're like, look, this is a space that was designed for male sex. If you don't want to see male sex, don't come. Trans people are very welcome here. If you don't want to see trans people having sex, don't come.
Don't get over there.
Right. So like what that does is it allows the space to encompass both like cis gay men and trans men who are into men as well. And it's a very open and welcoming space, but it makes it very clear in its like boundary setting that like we're not going to put up with homophobia either.
So what you're saying kind of is gay has been trendy?
Queer is trendy. Gay is never going to be trendy.
Okay, so like so again, like vocabulary, right?
Right.
So queer life is now trendy. It's like cool to say you are, and it's ruining the actual experience.
I wouldn't even say all that. Like I think look.
Explain. Yeah.
Okay, so like it's both more complicated and way less complicated than that. So the way I like to describe it is like this. Okay, it used to be in the 90s when I went to high school, right? There was like one table where all the freaks sat, right? And it was like the gay people sat there, the goths sat there, like the candy raver kids sat there, whatever, right? The burnouts. And now in high school, all of those people identify as queer, right? And like there is a part of queerness that is cultural, and those people have every right to be part of that culture, to contribute to it. There is also the biological aspect of queerness, and to like some extent like binary transness as well, that I think deserves consideration. And I wish that people who were joining the queer culture in a broader sense would have a little more respect for those of us who have a biological imperative to be there. That said, I do think there's this sort of tendency among some gay people, especially older gay people, to be a little gatekeepy. And while I understand the motivation, it's not useful, because bottom line, it's neither useful nor non-useful to accept or deny these people, so you might as well be nice. And just put people in their place from being homophobic. Gay people are homophobic. I still put them in their place.
That's so bizarre to me. Like, that doesn't make, you know what I mean? Just as a straight dude, like...
It's a cultural imperative.
Yeah.
You know, like we there was a meme that went around for a while that I thought was really interesting, right? It was talking about how men don't like women, right? If you talk about, like, yeah, men fall in love with women, they want to have sex with women, but like when you think about how men describe men they don't like, they ascribe female qualities to them.
That's interesting.
Right? And so like men have grown up to dislike women, and that cultural element of like gender policing broadly applies by both of the major, like, you know, pillars of cisgender, right? Male and female.
Oh, wow.
They do that to gay people across the board, right? Like women who suck are pushy, they're assertive.
The vocabulary words that are used, because I was called gay all my life. And I've been straight all my life.
And it turns out you're just whack, right? That's what they meant.
I think they just were scared of me.
No, and I like to say things are gay just because it gets a rise out of people, but I think if I had more of a platform, I probably wouldn't, because it's counterproductive to the movement, or, you know, whatever. Anyway, the point is, I don't want to get too bogged down in it, because like the thing is that like bottom line. I know. But like I do think that there are people out there who will be like, oh yeah, being queer is trendy, and like, look, 1 in 5 Gen Z people identify as some kind of non-straight, and like respectfully bullshit, right? That will change.
I hope so.
I mean, look, if it were true, I'd be thrilled. But I just don't think that is likely, right? But
so is it like just a problem with like the human mind or the human soul? Like, just like why can't we accept what do you, in your opinion? Like, I think you said something about capitalism earlier, which is true. Yeah. I think so. So you can't have kids, so then it's like, how do we get it? How do we get them in order? But what do you, I mean, just as an artist, just from an artist to another artist, it's like, what is the deal with the human problem? And now, I know. Answer it right now, Sean.
I mean, look, as far as like, you know, I mean, I've laser focused on the queer stuff because it's like an area of expertise for me, right? But like generally speaking, I think the issue with human beings is that we're in this very awkward adolescence between animalness and like godness, right? So like on the one hand, we can control our environment. On the other hand, we can't control our bodies very well. You know, we're mortal. We are prone to making mistakes based on our like carnal desires. We don't understand our carnal desires very well, right? One of the things I think is really interesting about sexuality in like this sort of like post-Christianity, post like Abrahamic religion world that we are currently living in is that we have kind of denigrated sexuality to a sort of like recreational activity, and it's an appetite, right?
See, this is what I think you're right about the American thing too, because like I think essentially we do come from that pure, like you said, the puritanical sort of binary thing, and it's like, and we are a country of that.
Well, and we've spent thousands of years, even before America, we've spent thousands of years sort of like restricting, categorizing, sidelining sexual behavior. And like one of the things that I think I learned in my life, because I used to be very anti-sexual, very, very like angry at gay promiscuity, all of these things. And I think it was
what can you I mean you don't have to say what
I mean, I was having really bad sex for one in my 20s, right? Part of it was because HIV is so scary in the 90s and zeros.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, so like but then PrEP happened and that changed everything, right? And you'll notice there's an uptick in anti-gay sentiment in politics that starts around when PrEP comes out, right? And like, up until like very recently, I mean, in 2022, I was like pulling my hair out, right? Because monkeypox happened and they let that happen, right? They absolutely let that happen.
Dude.
Two, around the same time, Texas, the same guy who pushed that really radical anti-abortion ban, right? Then turned to PrEP and he said, oh yeah, this drug actually like fosters and encourages like deviant behavior, and so Christian companies should not be required to have health insurance that covers it, right? And this led to a broader conversation about PrEP as a medication, as something to be discussed, like, pros and cons, right, of whether or not, queers should be able to have sex without fear of AIDS, because, like, after all, that will make them have more sex.
I mean, why would they ever want that? Why would anyone have sex in America? They shouldn't do that.
Well, unless it's with, your wife or mistress, respectively. But, like, the thing is that the same day that hearing was being done in Congress about PrEP, the CDC released like an easy reader font, like very reductive and like factually misleading report on the epidemic of STDs and like the increased transmission of STDs, right?
See, now we're getting conspiracy. I like this kind of government conspiracy route we're going.
I mean, it's not even. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's in the open. I think it's just facts. Yeah. Look. Here's the thing. You can make the assumption that this thing about how like people having unprotected sex, air quotes, is causing this uptick in STD transmission. That report coming out the same day as they are debating in Congress whether or not this drug that makes unprotected sex the norm amongst queer people should be covered by insurance, or generally speaking should be discussed as like part of the federal program. But yeah, so you'll see that there's like a pretty big uptick in anti-gay sentiment that comes out around PrEP, just like you'll see that there's a pretty large uptick in queer identification around the time that Black Lives Matter became the norm, right? If you track it, there's like this. And like that is a deeply cynical piece of information, okay?
Not cynical, but like not cynical, maybe accurate. What do they call conspiracy theories? Future facts.
I think oh God, you want to like lose your mind someday? Just Google conspiracy theories that turned out to be true.
Yeah.
And like there's some wild shit in there that we just do not talk about. Like look up Prescott Bush.
Oh yeah, that Nazi piece of shit.
Yeah, who tried to overthrow our government, and if it hadn't been for like literally 2 people in the military who squealed, they absolutely would have done a fascist overtaking of our government in the 30s. And we're supposed to pretend his son, the future head of the CIA, is just a nice, normal guy.
Oh yeah, he's just saying, hey, I'm over here now. I'm just here just trying to help you out.
Undignified.
Just fine.
And Democrats can't find anything to criticize about him except that he grabs some women's asses, because that's literally all they care about.
Prescott? No. You're talking about
George H.
the one? Yeah. George W. is just a useful idiot, right?
I mean, I think he has wet brain. But no, the real problem with George W. was Cheney.
Wow.
And I think that was intentional.
Do you want to go here?
No. I feel like there are plenty of people who can talk to you about that kind of stuff, but generally speaking, we haven't had a Republican win the popular vote since Reagan, I think, or maybe George H.W. the first time. So we're going on 30 years. If they win the White House this time, it will be through some bullshit. But
the Republicans or Democrats?
Republicans.
So wait, so you don't think it's all just like a shell game?
I mean, to an extent. I think the Democrats absolutely are a conservative party, and they go out of their way to manipulate the left out of their coalition, right? We watched them screw Bernie over twice.
Bernie was the only one I liked.
Bernie is the only one anyone likes. The thing is, Bernie had more popularity in both 2016 and 2020 than any other politician on both sides of the aisle.
Dude,
they manipulated him out of the primary in 2020. They outmaneuvered him.
Yes.
Right? And every single one of those candidates who dropped out before Super Tuesday was promised the VP slot.
Exactly.
And if you watch them give their concession speeches, they have this like smug air, and like I think it was fucking Klobuchar who like almost straight up said it. Like they all thought they were in a VPP. Obama called Buttigieg and told them that he would cut their funding. He would get to their funders if they didn't drop out. And so this was a way to make sure they had a position in the cabinet. But in 2016, Hillary owned the DNC, like literally owned the DNC.
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, I think Warren said that it was rigged. Anyway, the point is that electoral politics are deeply boring and they're not the solution to our problems, right?
Correct, because we're artists, right?
Well, and also because bottom line, change, as unsatisfying as it sounds, starts at the ground level. So if you want to talk about electoral politics, you should be talking about local elections, municipal elections. That's how you get the things that you need at the base level, right? And then you elevate upwards. So the only prayer I think we have,
this.
Yeah,
that's what we're doing right now.
I'm doing a tour overseas for my book, and you know, like with everything I do, it's about getting the work into the hands of people who I think need it, right? And so part of that for me was gay people in general, but in particular, I wanted it to be queer people maybe in places where it's not like the most thrilling to be queer, right? So I have a booking agent in Europe. He's like an old friend of mine. He's so cool. And I was like, look, I want to do Eastern Europe a lot. And I want to try to get some work in Swana, right? You know, the Middle East, air quotes heavily implied. And so we're still booking gigs. We've got some stuff in Western Europe, but I'm starting off in Romania, in Lithuania, and Estonia. We tried to get Latvia, but I think it fell through. I'm trying to remember. I have to look at the schedule. It's still going, but like we're on like 13 countries at this point. And I'm most excited about doing some shows in Cyprus, right in Nicosia, which is like the split city of Cyprus, right?
That sounds fun.
It's going to be really exciting. I'm really looking forward to it.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm in talks with some organizers in other parts of the world. I'm trying to get people in Egypt to book me. You know, the work I do is...
That'd be awesome.
It's demi-legal in places like that. But I think it's important. You know, I did... Some of my most satisfying work, I think, was when I was working in some parts of like the sort of like Indonesian archipelago, right? Like I was doing Malaysia, I did Singapore, and then parts of Southeast Asia too, so like Thailand, and I was over in the Philippines as well. And it's just sort of these are areas where, in some cases, being gay is like illegal.
I mean, you can get killed.
Yeah. And to me, like that is, so like I was doing underground clubs in Malaysia that are technically illegal, right? And it was just, and like among other places. And to me, that is like the work, like capital key.
Oh, I see. Because you're taking your own life in your own hands, though.
I mean, like every day we do dangerous shit, right? Like we get in a car.
Not a lot of people do.
Yes.
Not a lot of
you
people
cross
do.
the street in New York, that's dangerous. Like, I think I'm as safe as anybody else.
You sure about that?
I mean, not 100%, but I think it helps. Like, okay, yeah, there's like a certain amount of calculated risk here, but it is worth it because I think about like what my life might be like if I lived in one of these spaces and somebody came and was like very intentionally fearless in presenting work that was like promoting my own worth, right?
So it can give other people. So basically, in a way, what you're saying is that with this book, Hated for the Gods, you might be able to assist people who don't have this voice to themselves and maybe feel like threatened by the society they live in.
Yeah, well, and if nothing else, I mean, like I think I designed this book to take a lot of the things that I personally had realized about my own like sort of life arc as a queer person, and put them into print. And I've had like American citizens, okay, very privileged gay people be like, oh, I never thought of this that way. I think that kind of goal is accentuated and perhaps exacerbated in its necessity by places where queer positive
why put
thinking.
yourself at risk? I don't know. I mean, like, that's very brave.
I mean,
there's courage.
Again, I think it's a
courage
calculated risk, sure, but
no,
like,
but it's not though.
It's not like I'm going to Iran. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wish I could.
Maybe you should.
I would love to, but no.
No, I'm just saying. No, I wouldn't want to go to Iran either.
No. I would love to. It's just now it's not the time. You know, I was talking to people about possibly doing shows in Lebanon, and that's off the table too. Obviously.
Now.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but
I'm
saying, I guess I don't like compliments either, but what I'm saying is the fact that you even try. And this is an example of bravery. Now, sometimes I like Dutch courage too, which I take often, but what you're doing, I think, is important, and what you're doing is necessary.
I hope so. That's the goal, right? I mean, I think what I have been gifted with a lot of safety in my life and a lot of time, and I have really wonderful support group of friends and family, awesome. And so like as a result, like I have all of these things,
right? But your work is really good. Your work is good,
and that's because I've had the opportunity, the time, the support to do it, and so like in exchange for that, I feel like what is all of that for? If I'm gonna like, you know, in the Christian sense, hide my light under a bushel, right? You never know what you might inspire in another group of people.
Kill the Cat Radio.